Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for an all new episode recap of today's Days of Our Lives, June 30th, 2025. So we start off with Marlena and Roman because again, today's episode is really about Johnny's arrest and everybody being affected by it, right? So we start off with Marlena. She's coming in, she's asking Roman, for some of Caroline's chowder because she's craving it. So Roman didn't buy that. Roman believes that, she's still worried about Johnny and, they sit down and talk about it. And, she is just wondering, what more can he do to help him? He is also, he is also worried about him. And he also tells Marlena that he spoke to Carrie, and Carrie saying the best thing that he can do is just turn himself in. And Marlena was really startled by that because she's saying, how would it help if he turned himself in? So he said that, it's best if he does that because, if he doesn't, it's going to look really suspicious. People are not really going to believe that he was actually behind his father's shooting. So anyways, Marlena gets a text from Belle that Johnny has been arrested. So Roman is just thinking to himself, maybe I need to come in with my evidence to try and help Johnny. So he said that he's gonna just get his gun and turned it into the police station. Marlena said that she's going to meet up with Belle to also talk about what's going on with Johnny because she wanted to go ahead and see him, but Roman is saying that probably he's being processed and booked, so it's probably not the best time to go see him. So Rafe comes home to Gabby and he's talking to Gabby about what went down with Johnny, and he tells Gabby that Johnny confessed to going at the mansion on EJ shooting, and he did held a gun to him, but he did not actually pull the trigger. So he fully believes him on that, but Gabby's skeptical about it, and she's worried about whether or not it's gonna hold up, and hopefully it works out for him. And she is worried about if the case goes to trial that she would have to testify against Johnny, and she's worried about how EJ is going to take it and what kind of revenge is going to be enacted onto her. So anyways, Brave gets a call from Jada saying that she already went ahead and arrested him. So he's like, how could you go about it this way? I told you not to do it that way. I was leading up, pathway for him to actually come in and turn himself in and confess to you guys what was his side of the story, but you guys went ahead and did that, so now it's a whole mess. So he tells Gabby that he's gonna have to go to the station. So after he did come from the station, he did fill in Gabby on the updates on that, and Gabby's just worried that yes, this may as well go to trial, and she's just worried about how it may affect her. So earlier on the last episode that we saw last week on Friday, we saw when Johnny was getting arrested. So now we flash forward to today, and Chanel is there, and Chanel is wondering like what is going on because it's a whole public spectacle there in the middle of the square, and this is being done, which is just so messy to me, right? So um Johnny said that he's getting arrested for attempted murder of his father. So, Chanel is like, how? Like, what is really going on here? So, anyways, EJ is saying that I'm gonna make sure that you guys pay, and I'm gonna do everything to bring down the station. So Jada is saying, are you trying to threaten the commissioner? I thought you have changed since your coma. Says like, maybe the real me is coming out back. So she said, look, I get you want to protect your son, but we have to do it by the book, and it is what it is. So they take Johnny away, and Chanel is asking EJ like what's going on. EJ said that he has to rush to the station, he has no time for this. So she said, you got to make time, like what's really going on. So he tells Chanel what he's been remembering weeks ago about Johnny pointing the gun at him. He assumed that Johnny was the one who shot him, but then Johnny confessed to him earlier before his arrest that he wasn't the one behind the shooting, and he was just there holding the gun. So the real killer is still out there. So Chanel is just worried, like, what might be Johnny's outcome. So Belle and Paulina are talking in the interrogation room, and they're just wondering how this is going to really play out. Paulina is saying that they have to do it by the book. There shouldn't be no bias because, again, this is a high profile case. This is publicly scrutinized. So, they don't want the public to believe that, Johnny is just, it's all going to be done because of, who he is and how he's related to them. Because, again, it's a lot of personal bias that could come about. Belle is his aunt and Paulina is his mother in law. So, they don't want the public to believe that, they're giving him more of an opportunity, right? So, anyways, Paulina is saying go by the book, and Belle is saying, does he have to be in handcuffs? Does he have to be, brought in like this? So Paulina is saying that we have no other choice. I mean, he's like a son to me, and I really didn't want to do it this way, but we have to, like, the crowd, the public is looking at us to really uphold, you know some kind of professionalism and unbiased, right? So, anyways, she recused Belle from the case because, again, she's too close to the case, which is understandable. And, Belle understands because it's a lot of pressure on her to really go through with this. So Ari comes out and Ari's like, what's going on? So Gabby said that she left a voicemail message for Will because she's updating him on what's going on with Johnny. So she tells Ari about what's going on with her uncle Johnny and that he's been arrested for his father's shooting. So she's like, is he, did he actually do it? Is he innocent? So she's saying that he's claiming that he's innocent. So Ari believes him, and Gabby says, I really hope that he's actually innocent. All we can do is just pray for him. So at some point, Ari's high school diploma comes in, and she's not really enthused. She's like, okay, it is what it is. So Gabby is making a lot more of it as, a supportive, proud parent, and she's asking her to take a picture. She's not really into, teenagers. And they're going over the pictures, and they choose a suitable picture that they both like. So anyways, Ari says that she wants to go over to the pub to just check in on her great grandpa Roman and see how they're doing with all of this news. So she said that, that's pretty sweet. So she went over there to check in on them. So everybody's now at the police station. Belle is just apologizing to Johnny about how she wished that she could have done more. And then Rafe comes in, and Rafe is apologizing to Johnny, because he did give him his word that he wouldn't go through all of this whole thing. And, he's angry with how Jada went about it. And, Chanel is coming in begging to spend more time with her husband and to really find out what's going on. And, Jada said, I give you a few minutes. And she said that, don't worry, I'm here for you. I'm gonna hold on for you, and don't worry about it, you're gonna get through this, right? So they lead him down to the booking room. And EJ is also mad with Belle because he's like, how could you really let this go through? And Chanel also is talking to Paulina. Paulina said that, I was the one who put this in motion, I had no other choice. And Chanel doesn't want to really hear this. And she's like, what is really wrong with you? Or, I can't even look at you right now. So she storms out, right? So it's just a whole personal mess. But at the end of the day, I understand both sides, and I understand that it is, their job. Paulina's a mayor. She can't really be biased, and Belle is also the DA. She can't be biased because it's her nephew as well. So it's a lot of moving parts. I know that EJ's fears with Rafe because he wishes that Johnny didn't confide in him, because look where it went, right? So Rafe and Jada speak privately in the interrogation room, and he's saying, like, how could you really go about doing it this way? I thought that we had, you know a plan that we was going to go fulfill. And I thought that you wasn't going to really book him and arrest him right there. I was making sure that it's going to be a safe pathway for him to come in and confess. So she said, look, like, I had to do it how I had to do it. Like, I had to play by the book. And at the end of the day, I didn't want it to go down this way, but it is what it is. Like, I'm just doing my job. I had to consult with the DA, who had to consult with the mayor, and this is what the mayor suggested. Like, I had to follow my supervisor. So Rafe is just saying, this is all for her to, have, a higher conviction rate and all of that. And, it's just to make up for taking my job. So, he wanted it to be personal and petty. And, he had to go there. And then Jada said, really, like, if you had a higher conviction rate, maybe you still be in your job. So, he's like, do you have to bring, you have to go below the belt like that. So I'm saying, Rafe, you started it first by, being, condescending and everything. Like, at the end of the day, she has to do her job. Like, I don't understand why you had to make it be, so chauvinistic and, narcissistic. Like, it was really uncalled for. So anyway, she said, look, like, if you don't have anything useful to add to this, I suggest you just come out of my face. And I'm like, well, Jada, this was really spicy. So he just came out of there, and Paulina came back in there to talk to her, and she said, he got his boxes in a bunch. So she said, like, he's just mad about how we went about doing our jobs. And Paulina said that, look, Chanel is mad at me, and we had to do what we had to do. Like, we can't be biased. It is what it is. So Belle and EJ speak in the square, and EJ is saying, like, I mean, you have to help him out. So she said, like, look, Paulina recused me from the case. There's nothing that I can really do. And I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know. If I knew that he was going to be really rewarded this way, I would have, tried to do something else. So, anyways, EJ says, there's no way that, I'm going to let him go down for something that he didn't commit. He tells Belle about what he's been, grappling with for the past weeks, that his son might have, shot him. And to turn out that, Johnny did say to him that he didn't actually do it. So now he has a more stronger intention to just prove his innocence and, set him free. So he wants Belle to be back on the case. And she said, like, it's not that easy. So he said that, look, I'm going to, pull some strings to make sure that you get back on the case and you do what you have to do. You're an honest, fair attorney. I know that you're good at what you do, so I know that you will represent him really well. So anyway, she said that she was going to talk to Marlena, and he actually went on the phone to talk to a judge and said that he need to put talk to one of the receptionists for the judge, and he said, let's put aside what he has to put aside, and this is very important. It's a matter of life and death, right? So Belle talks to Marlena, and Marlena, they're just talking about the whole thing with Johnny. And she said that, she wanted to go down to see Johnny, but Belle says it's no use. Like, he's probably been processing book. You have to wait until later. So she said that's what Roman said as well. And Belle just feels helpless because she wished that she could have prevented this. She wished that there's somehow that she could help him, right? So Chanel and Johnny get to speak briefly because, Paulina did say, allow her time to speak with her husband. That's the, most that she can do, right? So they speak privately, and Johnny's just sorry about how this turned out to be one big mess. And she's like, how didn't you tell me, like, weeks ago when I was asking you what happened? So he said that I wanted to tell you, I actually was gonna tell you, but then I got arrested. I've just been going through a lot. I didn't know really how to tell you initially. And, I just want you to know that I didn't actually ended up doing it. So she believes him, and she's there for him in any type of way. And then he had to be, back to his cell. And then he's just thinking about how all the events took place, and how he wished his father was dead, and how he was holding the gun to him, and, like, you got what you deserve, and all these kind of things. And then there was a point where he was also fingerprinted earlier, and he had to go through the whole process. So I mean, let's see how this all pans out. We know that EJ is not gonna let his son, like, go down for something that he didn't commit. We all know how EJ is about his son. Let's see how this go. Some people have been saying that it's actually Chanel that did the shooting, but if it was her, like, I don't know. It would be very foul of her to actually have done this and to let her husband be going through all this. But let's see how this turns out, right? So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to my channel. Comment below your thoughts on today's episode. I will see you guys tomorrow.